Sometimes life hands you a story you never wanted to write. Sometimes you find yourself living in chapters you never imagined you'd have to endure. Today, I want to share with you a deeply personal account, a story of love, betrayal, parenthood, and the complicated journey of trying to rebuild your life when the foundation you thought you had crumbles beneath your feet. This isn't just another relationship story. This is about the real, raw experience of discovering that the person you trusted most in the world has been living a double life. It's about the impossible choices we face when children are involved, when love and pain become so intertwined that you can't tell where one ends and the other begins. If you've ever felt trapped in a situation where doing the right thing feels impossible, where every choice seems to hurt someone you love, then this story might resonate with you. Because sometimes, the most courageous thing you can do is finally choose yourself. 12 years ago, our narrator met the woman who would become his wife. Like many love stories, it started with hope, with dreams of a future together, with the kind of optimism that makes you believe anything is possible. They were young, they were in love, and life seemed to stretch out before them like an open road. But life has a way of accelerating when you least expect it. While they were still navigating the early stages of their relationship, still figuring out who they were as a couple, they found themselves facing one of life's biggest challenges: parenthood. Their first son was born while they were still dating, still learning about each other, still discovering what it meant to be partners. Anyone who's been through early parenthood knows how overwhelming it can be. The sleepless nights, the constant worry, the way your entire world suddenly revolves around this tiny human being who depends on you for everything. It's beautiful and terrifying and exhausting all at once. Add to that the pressure of being new parents while still figuring out your relationship, and you have a recipe for stress that can test even the strongest bonds. But our narrator was committed. He was ready to step up, to be the father his son needed, to build a family with the woman he loved. He was thinking about the future, about building something lasting, about creating the kind of stable, loving home that every child deserves. He had no idea that the foundation he was trying to build was already cracking. Picture this: you're adjusting to life as a new parent, trying to balance work, relationships, and this overwhelming new responsibility. You're away, maybe for work, maybe handling family obligations, and you come home to a confession that changes everything. I cheated on you. 4 words that can destroy everything you thought you knew about your life. 4 words that make you question every moment of happiness you've shared, every plan you've made, every assumption about the person you thought you loved. This is where our narrator's story takes its first devastating turn. While he was away, the woman he loved, the mother of his child, had been with someone else. Not just anyone, her ex. The person who represented her past, her history before him, her life before they built something together. But here's where the story gets complicated, where the neat categories of right and wrong start to blur. They weren't married yet. They were still technically dating, still figuring things out. Does that make it better? Does that make it forgivable? Or does it just make it more confusing? Our narrator chose forgiveness. He chose to focus on the future rather than the past. He told himself that they weren't married, that they were dealing with the stress of new parenthood, that people make mistakes. He chose to believe that this was an aberration, not a pattern. He chose to believe that their love was strong enough to overcome this betrayal. For 6 years, he carried this knowledge with him. 6 years of building a life together, of raising their son, of trying to create the stability and happiness that had been disrupted by that first betrayal. 6 years of back and forth, of working through issues, of trying to rebuild trust. And slowly, gradually, it seemed like they were succeeding. The wound seemed to heal. The relationship seemed to strengthen. They made the decision that couples make when they believe they've weathered the storm. They decided to get married. There's something profound about making the decision to marry someone after you've already been through a major crisis together. It feels like a declaration of faith, like saying, we've seen the worst of each other, and we're choosing to build a life together anyway. It feels like redemption, like proof that love can overcome anything. Our narrator and his partner decided to make it official. After 6 years of working through their issues, of building trust, of creating a family together, they were ready to take that next step. They were ready to say, "I do," and mean it, to promise each other a future built on the lessons they'd learned from their past. For 2 years, it seemed like that decision was the right one. They were married, they were raising their son together, they were building the life they'd always planned. The betrayal from years earlier felt like ancient history, like something they'd overcome rather than something that defined them. But then, like a nightmare you can't wake up from, history repeated itself. She flew out to meet her ex. The same ex from years before. The same person who had been the source of their first major crisis. She left their home, left their life together, left their marriage, to be with the person who represented everything they'd supposedly moved past. Imagine the devastation. Imagine the feeling of being transported back to that moment 6 years earlier, except this time it's worse. This time, they're married. This time, they've built a life together. This time, there's no ambiguity about commitment, no question about what they promised each other. This time, it's not just cheating, it's the destruction of everything they've built. Here's where the story gets even more heartbreaking, where the complexity of family life makes leaving feel impossible. Our narrator wanted to leave. Every instinct told him to walk away, to protect himself from further pain, to refuse to accept this level of betrayal. But then his wife did something that changed everything. She got their son, their innocent, loving son, to beg his father to stay. Think about that for a moment. Think about the position that puts a child in, the weight of adult problems being placed on young shoulders. Think about how that must have felt for our narrator, to have his own child, the person he loves most in the world, asking him to stay in a situation that was destroying him. This is manipulation at its most cruel and effective. It's using the love between parent and child as a weapon, using the desire to protect and provide for your children to trap someone in a toxic situation. It's making the victim feel like leaving would make them the bad guy, like protecting themselves would mean abandoning their child. So our narrator stayed. He stayed for his son, stayed to try to keep the family together, stayed because sometimes love means accepting pain to protect the people you care about. He stayed even though it meant living with someone who had betrayed him not once, but twice. For a while, it seemed like staying was the right choice. They had their second son, now 2 years old, and for a moment, it felt like they were building something new. A new chapter, a new beginning, a chance to create the family they'd always dreamed of. There's something about a new baby that makes you want to believe in fresh starts. This tiny person represents hope, represents the future, represents all the possibilities that still exist despite past pain. Our narrator threw himself into being a father, into providing for his growing family, into trying to create the stability and love that his children deserved. But when trust has been broken twice, when you've been betrayed by the same person in the same way, something changes inside you. You develop what our narrator calls the feeling, that instinctive sense that something isn't right, that hyper-awareness that comes from having been hurt before. It's like living with a broken bone that never healed properly. Most of the time, you can function normally, but when the weather changes, when conditions are right, that old injury starts to ache. That's what broken trust feels like. It creates a sensitivity, an awareness, a sixth sense that something is wrong even when you can't quite put your finger on what it is. Living with that feeling, that constant, low-level anxiety that something isn't right, is exhausting. It's like having a song stuck in your head that you can't quite remember, like having a word on the tip of your tongue that won't come. You start to question yourself. Are you being paranoid? Are you letting past betrayals color your perception of the present? But sometimes, that feeling exists for a reason. Sometimes, your instincts are trying to protect you from a truth you're not ready to face. Our narrator found the conversations. The messages between his wife and her ex. The same ex who had been the source of 2 previous betrayals. The same person who represented everything they'd supposedly moved past. Imagine the moment of discovery. Imagine scrolling through those messages and watching your worst fears unfold in real time. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was proof. Proof that while he was working to rebuild their marriage, while he was caring for their children, while he was trying to create a stable, loving home, she was planning another betrayal. The messages weren't just about planning to meet up. They were about the future, about ongoing deception, about a relationship that had been continuing in secret while she was living a lie at home. Reading those conversations must have felt like watching your life from the outside, like discovering that the person you thought you knew was actually a stranger. But here's what makes this discovery even more devastating. It revealed that the previous betrayals weren't isolated incidents. They weren't mistakes that happened in moments of weakness. They were part of a pattern, part of an ongoing relationship that had been happening in parallel to their marriage. Confronting someone who has betrayed you is one of the hardest things you can do. You're angry, you're hurt, you're devastated, but you're also hopeful that maybe, just maybe, they'll finally be honest with you. Maybe they'll take responsibility, show remorse, commit to change. Our narrator waited until the weekend to confront his wife. He presented her with the evidence, with the conversations he'd found, with proof of what she'd been planning. He was ready for anger, ready for denial, ready for almost anything except what he got. She gave him a sob story. Not an apology, not an acknowledgement of the pain she'd caused. Not a commitment to change or a recognition of how her actions had damaged their family. A sob story, a narrative designed to make him feel sorry for her, to make her the victim of circumstances rather than the architect of betrayal. But this time, something was different. This time, our narrator had reached his limit. Years of betrayal, years of manipulation, years of putting everyone else's needs before his own had finally taken their toll. He told her he wanted to separate. It was probably one of the hardest sentences he'd ever had to speak. After 12 years together, after 2 children, after countless attempts to make it work, he was finally admitting that enough was enough. You might think that being confronted with evidence of betrayal, that having your spouse tell you they want to separate, would be a wake-up call. You might think it would lead to some kind of reckoning, some acknowledgement of the damage that had been done. But sometimes, people are so committed to their deception that they can't stop even when they've been caught. Sometimes, the lies become so much a part of who they are that truth becomes impossible. Not even a week after the confrontation, our narrator found more conversations. More messages between his wife and her ex. More evidence that nothing had changed, that the discovery and confrontation had no impact on her behavior whatsoever. Imagine how that must have felt. Imagine the mixture of rage and resignation, the feeling of being completely disrespected, the realization that the person you'd spent 12 years of your life with had no intention of changing, no remorse for the pain they'd caused, no respect for your marriage or your family. This is where the story becomes not just about betrayal, but about the profound disrespect that betrayal represents. It's not just about the cheating. It's about the lying, the manipulation, the complete disregard for your feelings and your well-being. It's about being treated as if you don't matter, as if your pain is irrelevant, as if you're just an obstacle to be managed rather than a person to be respected. Now comes one of the most challenging aspects of this entire situation. Our narrator had made the decision to separate, had reached the point where he could no longer live with the betrayal and disrespect. But making that decision and being able to act on it are two very different things. He asked her to leave. It's a reasonable request. He's been betrayed, he's been lied to, he's been manipulated, and he needs space to heal and figure out what comes next. But she refused. Her excuse: her father is mean to her. Think about the audacity of that response. After years of betrayal, after being caught in lie after lie, after showing no remorse or willingness to change, she's asking him to continue to provide for her because she doesn't want to deal with uncomfortable living arrangements elsewhere. This is where the practical realities of life make emotional healing nearly impossible. Our narrator doesn't have anywhere else to go. He can't support himself financially if he's also supporting her. He's trapped in a situation where the person who has caused him the most pain is also the person he can't escape from. She wants to co-parent and cohabitat, to continue living together as if they're just roommates, as if the betrayal never happened, as if the pain she's caused doesn't matter as long as it's convenient for her. For a while, our narrator describes being numb. Numbness is sometimes a mercy. It's your mind's way of protecting you from pain that's too overwhelming to process. When you've been hurt so deeply, so repeatedly, sometimes the only way to survive is to shut down emotionally. But numbness doesn't last forever. Eventually, the feelings start to come back, and when they do, they can be overwhelming. Our narrator describes moving from numbness to disgust. Disgust at the situation, disgust at being manipulated, disgust at having to share his space with someone who has shown him such profound disrespect. That disgust is actually a healthy sign. It means he's starting to recognize that what's happening to him is wrong, that he deserves better, that his feelings matter. The realization that he's wasted 12 years of his life is heartbreaking but also liberating. It's the recognition that those years weren't just time that passed. They were time that was stolen from him through deception and manipulation. Time he could have spent building a real relationship with someone who respected him. Time he could have spent being happy instead of constantly questioning himself and his reality. One of the most devastating aspects of this situation is the isolation our narrator feels. He mentions not having many friends or family to fall back on. This isolation isn't accidental. It's often a result of the way toxic relationships work. When you're constantly dealing with drama, betrayal, and manipulation at home, you tend to withdraw from other relationships. You don't want to burden your friends with your problems. You don't want to admit that your marriage is failing. You don't want to face the judgment or the well-meaning advice that comes from people who haven't walked in your shoes. Over time, your world becomes smaller and smaller until it's just you and the person who's hurting you. This makes leaving feel impossible because you can't imagine how you'd survive on your own. But here's what's important to understand. That isolation isn't a reflection of your worth or your ability to build relationships. It's a consequence of the toxic situation you've been living in. When you're constantly in survival mode, constantly managing someone else's emotions and behavior, you don't have the energy to invest in other relationships. Perhaps the most frustrating aspect of this entire situation is the financial component. Our narrator recognizes that his wife can't support herself, and he feels trapped by the implications of that reality. This is where the intersection of emotional abuse and financial dependency becomes particularly cruel. Even when you recognize that you need to leave, even when you know that staying is destroying you, the practical realities of life can make leaving feel impossible. The unfairness of the situation is staggering. He's been betrayed, lied to, and manipulated, but he's still expected to provide financial support for the person who has caused him all this pain. She gets to continue her affair, continue her deception, continue living without consequences, while he bears the financial burden of supporting her. This is a form of economic abuse, using financial dependency to trap someone in a toxic situation. It's manipulative and cruel, and it's designed to make the victim feel like they have no choice but to stay. Self-love and space for reflection. He recognizes that he's been neglecting his own needs, his own well-being, his own future for far too long. The phrase, "I have wasted 12 years of my life on this," is profound because it represents a shift in perspective. It's not just about the betrayal anymore. It's about the recognition that he deserves better, that his life has value, that his happiness matters. But recognizing that you deserve better and knowing how to get there are two different things. When you're trapped in a situation like this, when you're financially responsible for someone who has betrayed you, when you have children to consider, the path forward isn't clear. So what does healing look like in a situation like this? What does moving forward look like when you feel trapped by circumstances beyond your control? First, it's important to recognize that healing isn't linear. It's not a straight path from pain to happiness. It's a messy, complicated process that involves setbacks and breakthroughs, moments of clarity and moments of confusion. The fact that our narrator is asking for help, that he's recognizing his need for self-love and space, that he's starting to feel disgust instead of numbness, these are all signs that healing is beginning. It's the recognition that he deserves better, that what's happening to him is wrong, that he has value as a person. But healing also requires action. It requires making difficult decisions, setting boundaries, and prioritizing your own well-being even when it feels selfish. It requires recognizing that you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved, and that you can't build a healthy relationship with someone who refuses to acknowledge the damage they've caused. One of the most important steps in healing from this kind of betrayal is building a support system. Our narrator mentions feeling isolated, having few friends or family to fall back on. This is common in toxic relationships, but it's not permanent. Rebuilding your social connections takes time and effort, but it's essential for your mental health and your ability to move forward. This might mean reconnecting with old friends you've lost touch with, joining support groups for people who've experienced betrayal, working with a therapist who specializes in infidelity and emotional abuse, building new relationships through activities and interests that bring you joy. The goal isn't to surround yourself with people who will simply validate your anger or tell you what you want to hear. The goal is to build genuine connections with people who will support you in making healthy choices, even when those choices are difficult. While the emotional healing is crucial, it's also important to address the practical aspects of your situation. This means consulting with a divorce attorney to understand your rights and options, working with a financial advisor to understand how to protect your assets, exploring options for spousal support and child custody, understanding your legal obligations and how to minimize your financial exposure. The goal isn't to be vindictive or to hurt your spouse unnecessarily. The goal is to protect yourself and your children, to ensure that you have the resources you need to build a new life, and to prevent further financial manipulation. One of the most challenging aspects of this situation is figuring out how to co-parent effectively with someone who has betrayed you so deeply. Your children need stability, love, and protection from adult problems, but you also need to protect yourself from further manipulation. This might mean working with a family therapist to develop healthy co-parenting strategies, setting clear boundaries about communication and interaction, documenting interactions to protect yourself legally, focusing on your children's needs rather than your own anger or pain. The goal is to be the best parent you can be while protecting yourself from further harm. This isn't easy, but it's possible with the right support and strategies. After 12 years in a relationship, especially one that involved so much manipulation and betrayal, it's easy to lose track of who you are as an individual. You've been so focused on managing someone else's behavior, on trying to save your relationship, on protecting your children, that you may have forgotten what you want, what you need, what makes you happy. Rebuilding your identity means reconnecting with interests and hobbies you've neglected, exploring new activities and experiences, setting personal goals that have nothing to do with your relationship, learning to enjoy your own company and solitude. This process takes time, and it can be uncomfortable at first. When you've been defined by your relationship for so long, being alone with yourself can feel strange. But it's also liberating. It's the chance to rediscover who you are and who you want to become. While this story is heartbreaking, it's also instructive. It teaches us about the importance of trusting our instincts when something feels wrong, setting boundaries and enforcing them, recognizing patterns of behavior rather than isolated incidents, understanding that forgiveness doesn't mean accepting ongoing abuse, prioritizing our own well-being and that of our children. It also teaches us about the complexity of human relationships, the way trauma can be passed from one generation to the next, and the importance of breaking cycles of dysfunction. Most importantly, it teaches us that it's never too late to choose yourself, to demand better, to refuse to accept treatment that diminishes your worth as a human being. To our narrator, and to anyone who sees themselves in this story, I want you to know that you are not alone. What you're experiencing is real, it's valid, and it's not your fault. The betrayal you've experienced, the manipulation you've endured, the isolation you feel, these are not reflections of your worth or your ability to be loved. You deserve a relationship built on honesty, respect, and mutual care. You deserve to be with someone who values you, who keeps their promises, who treats you with dignity. You deserve to be happy, to feel secure, to trust the person you're building a life with. The path forward isn't easy, but it's possible. It requires courage, support, and a willingness to put your own well-being first. It requires recognizing that you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved, and that you can't build a healthy relationship on a foundation of lies and betrayal. But you can build a new life. You can heal from this pain. You can create the stability and happiness that you and your children deserve. This story doesn't have a neat ending because it's still being written. Our narrator is still figuring out how to move forward, still dealing with the practical realities of his situation, still processing the emotional impact of 12 years of betrayal. But the fact that he's reached out, that he's recognizing his need for change, that he's starting to prioritize his own well-being, these are all signs of hope. They're signs that healing is possible, that change is possible, that a better future is possible. The journey from betrayal to healing is long and difficult, but it's a journey worth taking. It's the path to reclaiming your life, your happiness, your sense of self-worth. It's the path to becoming the person you're meant to be, free from the lies and manipulation that have defined your life for too long. Your story is not over. This chapter is ending, but the next chapter, the one where you choose yourself, where you build the life you deserve, is just beginning. And that chapter is going to be beautiful. Thank you for listening to this deeply personal story. If you're going through something similar, remember that help is available. Reach out to friends, family, or professional counselors who can provide support and guidance. You don't have to face this alone. Please like and subscribe if this story resonated with you, and share it with anyone who might benefit from hearing it. Sometimes, knowing that others have walked this path can provide the courage we need to take our own first steps toward healing. Take care of yourselves, and remember, you deserve to be happy.